such a big opportunity for programmers and musicians and coders all to work together. The people that are making this music, are really underserved. I got into programming because I wanted to figure out ways that I can implement code, I can program my own things to make me a better musician and use technology. And I think there's just like this huge opportunity to do this. And there's this huge stigma around being a coder or a musician. If you're a musician, you can't be like a suit, or you can't be a financier, or you can't be this. Or if you're a coder, you can't be like creative and cool, And so I hope to break that stigma, and I hope to merge art and music and coding together. Who here is a musician? Who here also does coding? Or is a coder as well? All right, so everybody basically. All right, this is great, fantastic. As you guys know, like doing code, it's a creative, like technical world, right? And music nowadays, specifically for what I do, maybe you guys can talk to me about what you guys do, but in terms of my production, it's actually kind of like coding. It's a workflow, it's a flow process. You use modules, you put them in, just kind of like in coding, you use libraries, for example. Instead of programming this one thing to do, you just grab the library and make it do your read. So that's the way I think about music and I think about coding, and it's all, when I went into coding, it was amazing. Like, for the first time in my life, I didn't have to switch brains. I was a financier, and I was also a musician, and I had to like go to work, and I had to be like, all right, let's turn on this side, And for the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't have to do that, so it's really cool. So I wanted to talk to you real quick about, what I do as a music producer and what I use. I use specifically Ableton. What do you guys use to make music?
Ableton.
Ableton?
Ableton.
Ableton?
Pro Tools.
Pro Tools? Sorry, Pro Tools?
Yeah, Pro Tools.
Okay, cool.
Ableton Live.
Ableton? Okay, cool, me too.
Processing, Max, modular synths, and Rack.
Max for Live?
Sometimes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Ableton? Anybody else? Anybody? Cool, alright, awesome. So you guys know about Ableton. I'm just going to go through a little bit of a recap what Ableton does for those people that use other stuff. I think this would be a great opportunity just to kind of like show what a producer does. So you guys can see this, right? Okay. So we have Ableton here. We have a couple of views, and this is the session view. This is the arrangement view. The arrangement view is basically the whole song, how you do this, how you program it. And this is kind of like a almost complete song. I'm working on a collaboration with an artist, and we started some stuff here. And I like to structure it out. So I've got the structure on the top. I've got the reference mix that I mixed to on the second one here. And then we've got drums, bass, lead, trumpets, all this other stuff. So the cool thing about Ableton, unlike Pro Tools, is I don't know if they've changed Pro Tools, but you can have these two views where you can record clips, like a small little sample that you can throw in, and then this is like the whole arrangement of the whole track here. And so you've got your various tracks here, and then once you click on one of them, you can actually see the instrument that you're using here, the various synth presets, whether it be the drums. I've got a drum group. You can see the hats, what kind of cues they have on here. So these are all in that same line, and these are applied to the individual tracks here. So, so I've grouped some of these in here. For example, if I play for you the drums here, you can do the drums specifically. And then if you go down to another line here, you can single it out. These are the various components of the track here that I've used in the track. Cool part about Ableton, I strictly produce in Ableton. I don't actually go outside of Ableton, like for example in Pro Tools. A lot of people go to Pro Tools to do mix and mastering. So in music there's a couple of different phases. You produce the track, you record people, you make the track, you lay it out. Then there's a phase where you mix it, where you adjust the levels so they're appropriate, and then you master it. And mastering is for the specific outputs. If it's a radio track that's going to be going to a radio show, you master it a little bit differently so people hear it differently through their speakers. And then if it's something for the club, maybe you master it a little bit differently from that. So I actually, a lot of people do it in different softwares, but for me specifically, I do it in Ableton here. And that just allows me to kind of like simplify my workflow. I make the music here, I mix it, I master it, and I just push it out to SoundCloud or whatever I'm doing. So also what the beauty about Ableton is, you can record everything in here. I come to the studio, I bring this, I plop it down and connect it to all my interfaces. I record every video onto it. I've got all my stuff on it, and I do all of it right on here. So it's really good. Kind of like maybe just using like one language to program everything, I guess you would say, if we're talking about code speak, using Python maybe just for everything, or JavaScript for everything. So it's really cool. The technology has evolved where you don't really need to go outside of one DAW. This is called a DAW, digital audio workstation, for those that don't know. So you don't have to really go outside of the box to really do everything. So I showed you the components, and I'll just briefly play the track for you guys, and this is how it sounds when it's kind of completed. You guys hear that earlier? How this works, just to kind of give you an idea about workflow and work process. Just kind of cool little components, like you can separate stuff. You can just separate the templates. Just go through it and mix and master everything. So these are all little components that I put together, all little pieces that I programmed and I made the music to. So, any questions? You guys have any questions? What's up?
Are there things you're doing that are involving scripting or coding, either for plugins that are added in or within the software itself?
So at the moment, I have played around with a couple of things. I forgot my lead motion controller. So I'm trying to implement that into like live performances, for example. There's a lot of different things that you can do, for example, with Max Relive, right? You said you played around with it. So Max Relive allows you to actually write JavaScript and write, I think, in Python as well. Write scripts and different things that will take different inputs from external sources or whatever it may be and use that for music. So you can write your own little plugin, basically. So it's really cool. Unfortunately, I don't have anything. I didn't necessarily put anything in this track, but I have used it. Maybe that's a great topic for another time. I can explore that and show you guys. But yeah, there's a really huge ability now to implement like programming languages and into the music stuff that you're doing. Really accessible stuff. Lead motion controllers. In fact, you can get something for your iPad, for example. It's like a ring, and you can move it around. Use a Xbox Connect, and program it to do various things. Like you move to the side and you play something here, you know, it'll affect it that way. So yeah. So I just wanted to kind of show you guys how this works. Any more questions? Anything else, guys? Yes, sir.
Kind of maybe a general question, but for live performance, how do you find you have to make a decision in terms of drawing a line between, say, having certain instruments already written out and just ready to go in the live file, Ableton live file, versus maybe do you turn that channel off and then that way it gives you room using the beat controller or whatever connect to play live? Like is there some kind of a decision-making process needed for that?
Sure. So the beauty about Ableton Live is that it's actually made for live performance. Unlike something like Pro Tools or Logic, it's a little bit tougher to implement into a live performance. This right here allows you to connect to MIDI controllers, and we've got a series of MIDI controllers here, and turn on and off various clips and various. So that clip view that I showed you here is really great because you can throw in a couple of clips and turn them on and off whenever you want. So it depends on what you want to do. And you can have live instruments that you can access through here. So yeah, I mean, you're not an octopus. I'm not an octopus, at least. I don't have a bunch of arms, so you do have to kind of figure out what you want to do. There are a couple plugins, for example, in Max Live, where you can install on here and turn a knob that will allow you to go through a various bunch of parameters, so you don't have to actually turn on and off stuff. You just play it, for example. But yeah, it's all about how you structure it. So if you have a live performance, you have to figure out a way that you're able to structure it where it makes sense to you. So if you want to focus on pianos, or you want to focus on like playing that horn part, for example, that I added, maybe you just take out that horn part and then you like do your improvisation there. Or maybe you do your piano, or you can have a loop. You record a loop real quick and then go to the section where it's trumpets and you play trumpets. I actually DJ, so I actually use Tractor. I think you said Tractor, right? So I use Tractor because of the ability to map it to various MIDI parameters. You can turn it on and off. So I started using more Tractor. I'm integrating it more with Ableton so that I can actually do live performances where I'm like doing a bunch of beats, throwing in my mixes, and then doing my little things. It's like very dynamic. So yeah, you have all these components. Just like I guess in coding, you have all these languages and these components. So you figure out like which one's easier for you. Which one is most appealing? And at the end of the day, sometimes like the thing that's really cool for you as a performer doesn't really make sense in the show, because people don't see you like, it's exciting to do this thing, but at the end of the day, it makes the same sound that like one button does, and that didn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? So there's this idea where, how do you make tools maybe for the studio to make this stuff cool, and then you turn out your performer hat on, and then you figure out like what is going to be most impactful to your audience. I think that gets lost on a lot of producers / artists that start from producing and then go into maybe like DJing. I started as a DJ actually, so I always like playing parties. Like you have a little bit of flair, you talk to people, you do the thing, you get excited about it. At the end of the day, like how tight your mix is not always the thing that's gonna be the most impactful. So yeah, it's a balance act. It's a balance act for sure.
Are you using both of the laptops right now?
I am not. This is for somebody else that's going to be coming out here.
Okay.
So
the reason I ask is because I often max out the capabilities of my laptop because I'm doing a lot of stuff with a lot of polyphony, and then maybe I'm doing some animation at the same time, and maybe running Max and Rack at the same time. And at minimum, my fan is going full speed.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you've dealt with that and how you've approached those kinds of problems.
Sure. I personally have not run into those problems because Ableton has been so great to me.
Yeah.
I have a really nice setup. I've been blessed to get a really nice setup, and I've never had those problems, to be honest with you. But if you do encounter those problems, when you start running 2-3 programs, I do see it get bogged down.
Yeah.
Something that I've noticed that if you freeze the tracks, for example, and you don't use software synthesizers and just freeze the tracks into audio, it really takes care of a lot of the CPU. That's one of the biggest things. in production, in electronic music production. That's what I produce. Sorry, I forgot to ask, what kind of music are you guys into, by the way?
Experimental.
Experimental?
Like neo-soul.
Neo-soul, okay.
Hip-hop.
Hip-hop, okay.
Drum breaks, West African funk.
Okay, cool. All over the place then, I see. Alright, awesome. In electronic music specifically, the reason I was asking is because in electronic music specifically, I know that a lot of the producers take and freeze tracks, manipulate them, freeze them again, manipulate them, put them into something else. Some genres don't necessarily do that a lot, but yeah, it saves on a lot of CPU, memory, the soft synths are not working. And in fact, in Ableton, what you can do, I actually have a frozen track right here. You can see it. This is a frozen track, it's in blue. What you can actually do is freeze the track, and then it'll turn it into audio, you can double it, and then what you can do is just use that, and then if you ever need it, you go back and you freeze it, and it's still there for you. So you have it everywhere. So yeah, those are some of the little techniques that I found that really work for me. So, anything else, guys? Any more questions? Don't be shy. Step right in. Okay, alright, cool. Alright, cool, thank you guys. Next person up is Hiko. Oh, no, sorry, no, not Hiko. Andrew. Andrew's gonna talk to you about robots.
Robots and shares and robots and such. Can you, or do I have to go through?
Yeah, now you gotta just switch it over to cast.
By the way, we come for you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, presentation.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
And thank you to our illustrious Crash Space host. If you guys are new, this is kind of a members-driven hackerspace, which is like full of artists and programmers and things like that, people who make awesome cars at Burning Man, that type of person. So a couple of key members in the back, if you want to get a tour of the space afterwards, just say, hey, tell them what you do. Do you want to give the spiel or do you want me to keep going? All right. You know, there's a giant cat in the background, you can figure it out. Thank you for the invitation to speak. I am going to talk to you about chairbots. How many people here have like built a robot before, any kind? It could be like a Lego thing. Cool. So I'm going to kind of veer between the technical and the hobbyist, but just kind of like take it back a little bit. What I'm going to talk about later on is mixing robotic chairs with choreography. But in order to get to that point, I want to talk about the intellectual framework of this. And so what this is based on is the PhD work of Dr. Heather Knight. She graduated from Carnegie Mellon 2 years ago, I think, and she currently has a lab at Oregon State called the Charisma Robotics Lab. And so one of the challenges of robots is kind of the interactivity and things like that. And so her thesis, which you can see the link here below, but it was expressive motion for low degree of freedom robotics. So a low degree of freedom robotics is like a Roomba or R2-D2 versus C3PO. R2-D2 would be the low degree of freedom robot. And what was fascinating and part of the brilliance of our thesis is that it discussed something called the Le Bon movement analysis. And this is used a lot in acting and things like that. And I'll give you an example. It basically correlates like speed to gesture. So if I reach out to pick up this camera or a cup or whatever here, that's not viewed as threatening. But if I sit here and I go like that and kind of throw a punch, then the human would perceive that as threatening. And so how this gets into robotics and kind of interpreting how robots move is you can code for it. Because you have, or another example of this is like someone who walks like a gorilla is intimidating even though they're slow, as opposed to like something that's skirting fast. That kind of evokes fear as opposed to like the slow and the powerful. And so you have these kind of dualities within motion. And this is how humans will perceive also inanimate objects, like a trash can with its roboticized or a chair, as we'll learn later. But basically, it has like space, weight, time, flow, and then the element of direct, strong, sudden bound, and then the effort element on the right. By codifying kind of how human motion is interpreted into a grid like this, you can also code it. And so this will, and the Le Bon system is also cross-cultural, because another problem with robots is like a robot that does something in one culture won't do it in another culture. I'll give you a little example of this. So they've used robots in hospitals, and on one floor of the hospital, I think it's the maternity ward. Like the robot is like welcomed and people are polite to the robot. But when they use the same robots on an emergency room floor, the doctors are like, get out of my way, and they're mean to the robot. So it's a hospital building, two different floors, but the robots are treated entirely different because of cultural things, even though from the robot's perspective, its interactions are all the same. So by integrating this Laban movement analysis system into low degree of freedom robots, you can kind of have a broader cross-cultural interpretation of what the robot's movement means. And so, yeah, if you have questions on it, let me know, but I will move on. So, Dr. Knight also founded this thing called the Robot Film Festival, which I was a co-producer on this year. And basically it's an annual film festival that celebrates benevolent human-machine relationships. And one of their slogans is, what if Skynet loved us, right? So if we could make a movie about a Skynet that doesn't lead to the annihilation of the human race, it probably wouldn't sell as many tickets, but it would kind of influence how engineers think of their craft and also their potential, what they're doing in the world. And so at her lab at Oregon State, she has a resident artist named Jeremy Urand who did a small dance performance with these chairbots during the film festival. That got me thinking of like, oh wow, you can kind of use the Laban movement analysis not as like, because often with like technology and robots in particular, there's always this like funding problem where like, how do you scale it to a product or things like that. But if you kind of stay in the realm of art and academics, because the academy is going to be open source, then you can do kind of cooler stuff. It obviously presents other funding challenges, but so yeah, I saw that performance, and then this is the chair-bot that Oregon State is developing, and it's basically a modified, similar to a Roomba, but it's called a Neato. And up here there are these touch sensors, and I'll get to the next. Yeah, so you pull out the part that sucks in the dirt normally, and then it's an Arduino and a Raspberry Pi B+. So it's pretty basic, so like lots of people can build it if they want. Here's the software instructions are up here, the hardware instructions up here. So for the technical people, it uses mostly a system called ROS, which stands for Robot Operating System. And to give you a brief history on that, a lot of different labs were building redundant code to do similar tasks. And so a few years ago, I forget the exact date, but this community sprung up to kind of create shared libraries using ROS so that people didn't have to have redundancy of the problems they were solving. So it's great if you have kind of like a standard machine that's doing standardized tasks, then ROS is really something you should look into learning. But again, if your robots are kind of highly specialized, you might want to stay on the more artisanal path, we're going to call it that. But yeah, so this is like most of the magic right here. So technically it's feasible, which I really like. And so in terms of the robot as performance art, and by the next one you do of these, I should have a few functioning models.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
So you can operate the robot via a remote control with someone off stage is helping it, and so the robot can move with the performer like that. But there's also touch sensors that you can put on the chair. So as the dancer approaches and touches one sensor, you can have a hard-coded command. The robot then, like, let's say, twirls away or something like that. And then you can also, there's, based on the consumer functionality, this being an at-home vacuum cleaner, there's kind of these magnetic strips that you can put in front of the robot. So you can, if you create the interaction space to your performance needs, you can actually do some really amazing stuff. And if you bear in mind that kind of Laban system of how humans respond to like, for example, if the chair like races at the performer, that's like, the robot's gonna hit the performer. But if you have the robot just like wiggle, that's like, hey, come sit on me, right? So there's this kind of, not a language, but a grammar of emotion that you can integrate with chair in the performance context, which I find kind of fascinating. And so, yeah, where this is going is I've started a collaboration with a choreographer and performer named Dana Wilson. She's 1/3 of this awesome act called the Seaweed Sisters. They have these fantastic YouTube videos and things like that. And then she's been performing with Justin Timberlake on many of his tours and stuff for about the past decade. So I'm really excited about this collaboration because it's like high-level chairbot, right? And so that's what's going to come up next. We should have our inaugural performance within a few months, and that's where we're going with this. And this is, yeah, you can kind of see a better view that it's basically just like a robot vacuum cleaner with a chair on top. But if you integrate these philosophies, you can actually make fantastic art, and it integrates music, obviously. So yeah, that's me. And then I'm curating a art show called Robot Love at the Hive Gallery, which I imagine will have a dancing chair or 3. And yeah, you should come to that if you want to submit art. Hit me up at one of these places for that show. Opening's December 8th. And I'm honored and thrilled to answer questions, and thank you for the opportunity to speak and share this.
You guys have any questions?
Yeah, so it's really impressive just that a Roomba-like thing can actually bear the weight of that chair. You mentioned sitting on it. Do you have shocks and it can drop down onto it?
You have to sit lightly during the performance. I think the weight tolerance for that is, the chair itself, sans the robot, is 264 pounds. So I'm not going to be sitting on that. And then I think it's like 35 without it damaging the Nito. It's not a Roomba, it's a Nito. They're a bit less expensive. You can hack them quite easily. So Nito, everyone. Yeah.
Any more guys? Girls?
Yeah.
On one of the early slides, you have the sort of the different sort of types of movements or different types of characteristics.
Yeah.
What's an example of flow? What is that?
I believe that's like, you know, if you're a happy drunk, versus like a desperate sloppy drunk, like,
Have smoothness of motion as opposed to
or yeah, you know, jellyfish versus, you know, flow.
So how do we find out about the dance performance?
Yeah, send me an email, or it'll probably be on the Hive. If you want to come to the opening of the art show, we'll definitely have one there. We're probably going to have one prior to that as well. But yeah, send me an email because I can't guarantee that all robots will function appropriately for a show date right now.